24th of October. Chapter 1, Part 2. Mononaga left what was known as the Round Table. Guild members had a ring reserved for their use. Anyone who wore that ring would automatically appear in this place when they logged into the game. Barring special circumstances, if any guild members returned, they would do so in this room. However, Mononaga knew that the other members of the guild would not be coming back here. In the last few minutes of the game, the only player who remained in the gigantic great underground tomb of Nazareth was Mononaga himself. Mononaga suppressed the emotions that were rising like a tide and walked through the halls. The place, like a castle built of alabaster, a magnificent world suffused with regal atmosphere. If one raised their head to look to the ceiling, they would see crystal chandeliers hanging from the ceiling at fixed intervals, creating a warm light. The broad hallways had brilliantly polished stone floors, which reflected the light from the chandeliers in a way that made it seem like twinkling stars were embedded in its surface. If a visitor opened the door on those sides of him, his attention would be captivated by the decadent furnishings within. A third party observing this scene would probably be staring in awe. This much hated great underground tomb of Nazareth had once been attacked by the largest invading force ever assembled in the game's history. 8 guilds banded together with their allies to bring a force of over 1,500 players, mercenaries, and NPCs to bear on Nazareth. But in the end, they had been miserably defeated. That legendary dungeon is now reduced to this. The great underground tomb of Nazareth had once been a 6th-floor dungeon, but it had been dramatically altered after Vol.1 took control of it. Currently, it was a 10th-floor dungeon, and each floor had its own unique theme. The first and third floors were modeled after a tomb. The 4th floor was an underground lake. The 5th floor was a frozen glacier. The 6th floor was a rainforest. The 7th floor was a sea of magma. The 8th floor was a wasteland. And the 9th and 10th floors were the realm of the gods. In other words, the home base of Iron's Overlord, which had ranked among the top 10 Yggdrasil's thousands of guilds. The sound of Mononaga's footsteps and the tapping of his staff rang throughout this holy sanctuary. After turning several corners in these vast hallways, Mononaga saw a woman in the distance, heading in his direction. She was a sensual beauty, whose lush golden hair graced her shoulders. She was dressed in a long, elegant maid outfit, with a large apron. She was roughly 170 centimeters tall, with a slender build. Her ample bosom looked like it would burst out of her boudeche at any time. Her overall appearance was attractive, and gave the impression of being graceful and kind. As the two slowly approached each other, the maid darted to the side of the hallways and bowed deeply to Mononaga. In return, Mononaga raised his hand in acknowledgement. The maid's expression remained as it was. She kept the same smile on her face just now. In Yggdrasil, facial expressions did not change, but this girl was slightly different from player characters, with their unchanging expressions. This maid was a non-player character. She was not controlled by the game, but by a set of AI routines. Simply put, she was a mobile doll. Even if her design was incredibly realistic, her bow was nothing more than a programmed action. Mononaga's acknowledgement of her bow was nothing more than a foolish gesture, because she was nothing more than a doll. However, Mononaga had reason for not treating her coldly. There were 41 maid NPCs in the great underground tomb of Nazareth, each with their own unique design. Their creator was a Manaka, who had broken into the industry with his maid illustrations, and who currently serialized in a monthly magazine. Mononaga studied the maid carefully. Apart from her look, he also scrutinized her uniform. The intricacy of the design, especially the fine embroidery that speckled her apron, was enough to make people gasp in Their designs had been exceptionally detailed because of the declaration. Maid uniforms and their secret weapons. Mononaga couldn't help but feel nostalgic as he remembered the complaints from the other guild members who had helped with the design. That's right. I think it was from then he had started saying that maid uniforms are justice. Come to think of it, I think the manga he's drawing now has a maid as a main character. Do his assistants cry when he goes overboard in designs? Right, Grim-san. The maid's AI routines had been programmed by Hirohiro-san and 5 others. In other words, this maid was the personification of his past friend's hard work. He could not simply ignore her without feeling bad about it. After all, this maid was also part of this glorious history of Ainz Oal Gong. Just as Mononaga was contemplating these matters, the maid raised her head, as though she had spotted something, and tilted her head in surprise. The maids would do this if anyone lingered around them for longer than a certain period of time. As Mononaga searched through his memories, he could not help but be impressed by Hirohiro's elaborate program. There should have been other hidden poses programmed into them as well. Mononaga wanted to see them all, but the time was very tight. Mononaga glanced at the translucent watch at his left wrist and checked the time. As he thought, there was no time for him to spend roughing around. Thank you for your hard work. Mononaga walked past the maid after the painful farewell. As he passed the maid, there was no response. That was only to be expected. Still, if she did not reply to him, Mononaga still felt it had to be said, because it was the last day of Ikase. Mononaga continued forward, leaving the maid behind. After a while, a gigantic staircase appeared before Mononaga's eyes. It was wide enough that over 10 people could walk down it side by side, arms outstretched with no problems. A luxurious red carpet lay on the steps. Mononaga slowly descended the stairs until he reached the lower floor, the 10th floor of the great underground tomb of Nazareth. The place where he had arrived was a large receiving room with several figures within. The first to enter Mononaga's line of sight was a distinguished old gentleman in a butler's outfit. His hair was pure white, even the beard and moustache near his mouth. However, the old man's back was a ramrod straight, like a sword forged of steel. His face was deeply wrinkled and gave onlookers the impression that he was a kind and gentle person. But his keen eyes were like those of an eagle sizing up its prey. There were 6 maids standing behind the butler. However, these maids were of different ones from the one Mononaga had met earlier, in looks and equipment. The more maids wore gauntlets and greaves of gold, silver, black, and other colored metals. Their armor was designed to look like the outfits of maids in manga. They did not wear helmets, but instead white hairdresses. In addition, every girl was armed with a different weapon. They were the very picture of battle maids. Their hairstyles were also varied. They wore their heads in buns, ponytails, long and straight, French curls, and so on. The one thing they had in common was that every single of them was attractive. The exact way in which they were attracted also varied within them. One was sporty and athletic. One resembled a demure Japanese maiden. One of them had a seductive allure, and so on. These girls were NPCs, but they were distinctly different from the other maids, who had simply been designed for entertainment. Their purpose was to defend against invaders. In a game like Ikase, guilds enjoyed several benefits if they possessed a guild base of castle tier or higher. One of these was NPCs for base defense. The NPCs that the great underground tomb of Nazareth could field were undead monsters. These automatically spawning NPCs, or pop monsters, had a maximum level of 30. Even if they were destroyed, after a while they would respawn on their own, at no cost to the guild. However, players could not customize the AI and appearance of these pop NPCs. As such, they were hardly useful in deterring intruders who were universally players. There were also another type of NPCs, the ones designed from the ground up to their master's satisfaction. If a guild possessed a castle-grade guild base, the owning guild would would be allowed 700 levels to be distributed between any number of NPCs they wanted. Because the highest level in Yggdrasil was 100, by those stipulations, the guild could make 5 level 100 NPCs and 4 level 50 NPCs, or any combination thereof. When designing an original NPC, one could customize the weaponry and other equipment in addition to clothes and appearances. As a result, one could create NPCs that were far stronger than the automatic spawns and place them in key locations. Of course, not every NPC had to be designed for battle. A certain guild which called themselves the Kitty Kingdom fielded no NPCs other than cats or cat-related creatures. This way, each guild could freely determine their unique style. Mononaga placed his thumb on his chin and looked at the butler and maids who were bowing to him. Mononaga typically had used teleportation magic to move throughout the various rooms, so he had not had many chances to come this way. Looking at the staff filled him with nostalgia. He reached his hands out and touched an invisible menu, opening a page only guild members could see. Then he selected an option from several choices. As he did so, the names of the butlers and maids appeared over their heads. I see, so that is what they were called. Mononaga laughed softly at himself for forgetting their names, and also because of the fond memories they brought up. There had been quite a few arguments between his colleagues when they had chosen a name for the NPCs. The butler, Sebas's design was that of a house servant. The 6 maids beside him were combat maids loyal to Sebas. Together they were called the Pleiades. In addition to these maids, Sebas was also in charge of the tomb's manservants. The text box for Sebas contained more detailed information, but Mononaga did not feel like reading. The servers would shut down soon, and he had to be somewhere before then. As an aside, all the NPCs apart from the maids were also very well fleshed out. This is because the guild members were all fans of complex backstories and details. Many of the guild's members were artists and programmers, and a game like this would emphasize the customization of appearances and allow them to indulge their desires. To create and design was a godsend to them. Originally, Sebas and the combat maids were intended to be the last line of defense against invaders. However, if enemy players could penetrate this deeply into the dome, they would be able to handily defeat Sebas and the maids, so they were little more than speed bumps to buy time. However, no player had ever made it this far, so they had been waiting here for orders. Without orders, all they could do was to wait for a chance to be of use. Mononaga tightened his grip on the staff of Heinz Olgau. He knew it was foolish to feel pity for NPCs. They were nothing more than a collection of electronic data, and the closest they could come to real emotion was a very skilled set of AI routines. However, as a guildmaster, I shall put the NPCs to good use. Mononaga could not help but laugh at himself for that incredibly lame line, and then he gave them a command. Follow me. Sebas and the maids bowed respectfully to show they had heard and acknowledged the order. Leading them away from this place was not what the guild members had intended for them. Aens o Algon was a guild that respected the will of the majority. It was forbidden for an individual to selfishly manipulate the NPCs that everyone had made together. However, this was the day when the curtains would fall on everything, given that everyone would probably forgive his indulgence. As Mononaga thought about this, he continued moving forward, followed by the sounds of many footsteps. Eventually, the group arrived at a vast hemispherical dome-shaped hall. 4 colored crystal lamps glittered from the ceiling, and there were 72 niches in the walls. Most of them were filled with statues. Each statue was modeled after a demon's appearance, and there were 67 of them. This room was called the Lamentation. It was named after the lesser key of Solomon, which was a magical grimoire. The statues and niches were designed to resemble the 72 demons mentioned in that book, and in truth, they were golems made out of extremely rare magical alloys. There should have been 72 of them, but there were only 67, because the creator got bored of that project and quit halfway. The 4 colored crystal lamps on the ceiling were a type of monster, and the moment an enemy entered their range, they would summon high-ranking elementals of earth, water, wind, and fire, in addition to bombarding them with area-affected attack magic. If these crystal lamps all attacked at once, the firepower they unleashed could easily defeat 2 parties of level 100 players, which would be roughly 12 people. This room could be said to be the final defensive line of the great underground tomb of Nazareth. Mononaga led the servants behind him past the magical circle, and lit eyes on the giant doors before. The majestic set of double doors were over 5 meters in height and covered in intricate carvings. The left side was shaped into a beautiful goddess, while the right was made to resemble a cruel demon. So realistic was their design that even from across the room, Mononaga thought they would attack him. Still, though the carvings looked like they could move, Mononaga knew that he had never moved before. Since we made it all the way here, we could gather in glory and welcome these brave heroes. Let others slander us they will, but we shall welcome them proudly and openly, like the magnanimous lords that we are. That ayah had been passed in accordance with majority vote. Ulbert's son. Ulbert Alain Odell was arguably the most obsessed with the idea of evil in the guild. Was it because of Chunibyu? Mononaga felt the way as he looked around the whole large hall. Will these 2 statues attack? He was right to feel so uneasy. Even Mononaga did not fully grasp the secrets of all the mechanisms in this dungeon. It would not be so strange if one of the retired guild members had left a strange sort of present for him. The one who had designed this set of doors was just such a person. In the past, he designed a very powerful golem, but shortly after activation, a flaw in the combat AI made itself known and attacked everyone around it. To this day, Mononaga still had his doubts about whether that mistake had been on purpose. Hey, Lucifer-san, if they really attack me, I'll be mad. However, Mononaga's caution in reaching for the doors was unfounded. As he touched them, they opened by themselves. Also, they did so slowly, in deference to their massive fate. The air changed. Although the atmosphere from earlier was filled with quiet solemnity, the scene before his eyes now exceeded that by far. The air became a pressure that weighed heavily on the entire body. It was an exquisite piece of work, and in the wide, high room, even packing several hundred people inside would not make this room feel crowded. The high ceiling and the surrounding walls were a predominantly white color, with golden decorations as highlights. The numerous chandeliers which hung from the ceiling were made of precious stone of all colors of the rainbow, and they emitted a fantastic dreamlike radiance. Numerous flags embossed with different symbols hung from the flagpoles, sunk into the walls. A total of 41 of these flags swayed gently in the wind from the ceiling to the floor. In the center of this room, that was tinted gold and silver, there was a flight of stairs about 10 steps high. Atop these stairs was a gigantic throne, carved out of a single piece of crystal, whose back was high enough to touch the ceiling above it. A huge red banner hung down behind it, proudly displaying the symbol of the guild. This place was located in the deepest reaches of the great underground tomb of Nazareth. It was also the most important place, the throne. Oh, even Mononaga could not help but grasp the sheer magnificence of this room. He felt that it was easily the second most impressive location in Icarus, if not the first. This was the most suitable place for him to welcome the final moments of the game. As Mononaga advanced through the room that seemed to absorb the sounds of his footsteps, his eyes fell on the female NPC that stood by the side of the throne. She was a beautiful woman who wore a pure white dress, and the faint smile of her face was that of a goddess. In stark contrast to her dress, her hair was a flowering, lustrous jet black that reached down to her waist. Although her golden irises and verticality slitted pupils were somewhat odd, apart from those she could easily be considered a world-class beauty. However, a pair of curled horns sprouted from the sides of her head. In addition, a pair of black feathered wings emerged from her waist. Perhaps it was because of the horns, but her divine smile seemed like a mask concealed her true features. She wore a golden necklace that patterned her after a spiderweb. It extended from her shoulders down to the tops of her breasts. Her slender wrists were covered in a pair of lustrous silk gloves. In her hand she held a strange weapon that looked like a band of some sort. It was roughly 45 centimeters long, and a black orb hovered at its end, floating lightly in the air, but holding its position at the end of the wand. Mononaga had not yet forgotten her name. She was overseer of the floor guardians of the great underground tomb of Nazareth, Albedo. She was in charge of the 7 NPCs floor guardians. In other words, she was the highest ranking character in the great underground tomb of Nazareth. Because of that, she was permitted to await orders within the throne room, in the deepest reaches of Dor. However, Mononaga turned a sharp look on Albedo. I knew there was a world-class item here, but how is it there are 2 of them here now? In Yggdrasil, there were 200 ultimate items in the game, known as world-class items. World-class items possessed unique abilities, and some of them were so balance-breaking that they could even request changes to the game's rules by the developers. Of course, not every world-class item possessed such insane power. Even so, the player who possessed even a single world-class item would be catapulted to the highest echelons of fame in Yggdrasil. Aen's Orgon possessed 11 items of them, the most of any guild. Even that was far in excess of any other guild. The guild in second place only possessed 3 such items. With the permission of the other guild members, Mononaga was allowed to possess one of these ultimate items. The rest of these world-class items were scattered throughout Nazareth. However, most of them were stored in the depths of the treasury, defended by his avatars. The only reason why Albedo could possess such a rare treasure like this without Mononaga's knowledge was because the guild members who designed Albedo had given it to her. However, since today was already the last day of the game, Mononaga felt there should be respect to the wishes of his comrades who had given the item to Albedo, and so he did not take further action. This is a good place. Mononaga's words were directed to Sebas and the Pleiadians as they reached the base of the stairs leading to the throne. After that, he began climbing the stairs, but stopped when he heard footsteps behind him. Mononaga could not help but laugh, although his skeleton's face could not show any expressions. The NPCs were merely inflexible AI routines. If you did not give a specific worded command, they would not recognize it as an order. Mononaga had forgotten this, and thus he had not properly commanded the NPCs. After his guild members left, Mononaga had begun solo hunting by himself to a nearly ridiculous degree in order to earn the gold needed to maintain Nazareth. Not build friendship with other players and avoided them, as well as the high difficulty areas he used to visit when his guild members had still been around. Then he would deposit his earnings in the treasury before logging out. This had been his routine for almost every day. As such, he did not have much contact with NPCs. Stand by. The sound of footsteps stopped. After Mononaga gave the correct command, he ascended the final steps and arrived at the throne. He stared openly at Albedo, who took by its side. Though he had entered this room before, he did not recall her eyes tracking him in his memories. What kind of backstory was she designed with? All Mononaga knew about her character was that she was the overseer of the Guardians, as well as the highest ranked NPC in Nazareth. Driven by curiosity, Mononaga opened up a console and began scrolling through the details of Albedo's flavor text. A flow of densely packed characters filled his vision. It was like reading an ancient epic poem. If he took his time to read it in detail, he would probably still be reading until the game ended. Mononaga felt like he had stepped on a landmine. If he could move, he would have been trembling now. He wanted to scold himself for having forgotten that Albedo's creator was obsessed with this sort of thing. However, since he had already opened it, he had no choice but to abandon his resistance and continue scrolling. He didn't even skim the text for the important points. He simply scrolled to the bottom as fast as he could, while looking at the title. After skipping past vast expanses of text, Mononaga's mind settled on the last line and froze. She's also a slut. He could not help but stare. What does this mean? A cry of disbelief escaped Mononaga's non-existent lips. He looked the words over several more times, eyes filled with suspicion, but in the end he could not find any other meaning to them. After several rounds of thought, he could only come to the conclusion he had stared with. A slut. It must be an insult of some sort. Each of the 41 guild members had designed their own NPCs, so he could not understand why anyone wanted to treat the NPC they had designed themselves in this manner. Perhaps he would understand why after reading the long essay of Leviticus. However, there were guild members who would come up with these unconventional designs. Albedo's designer, Tabula Smagarida, was one of these people. Is that what they call gap more? Tabula-san. Even so. Isn't the backstory like this far too much? Mononaga could not help but think that. All the NPCs made by everyone were an inheritance of the guild. Designed the highest ranking NPC, Albedo in this manner made him think that Tabula Smagarida was beyond saving. Would it be fine to change an NPC's backstory based on a personal decision? After thinking about this for some time, Mononaga came to a conclusion. Should I change it? Currently with the guild weapon in his possession, Mononaga could be said to be the master of the guild. It should be alright to exercise the guildmaster's authority he had never used before. Mononaga's doubt vanished like a mist, as he steeled himself to right the wrongs of his guildmate. He extended the staff of iron Spulgon that he was holding. Normally, one would need developer tools to change a character's backstory, but through his power as guildmaster, he could directly access the settings and edit them. After some action on his console, the slut line vanished. Well, it should be like that. Mononaga thought a bit more, and looked at the gap in Albedo's flavor text. I should probably fill that up. This feels a little silly. Although he was laughing at himself, he still typed out a few words in the console. Keyword. The words formed a sentence. She loves Mononaga. Uwah, how embarrassing. Mononaga covered his face with his palm. It felt as though he was designing his ideal girlfriend, complete with love events for himself, which embarrassed him so much that his heart began pounding. Although he wanted to rewrite it again out of shame, in the end he changed his mind and decided against it. The game would end soon, after all, and his shame would vanish with it. Besides, the sentence he added matched the gap left by the deleted sentence. Exactly. It would be a shame if he deleted it and left an empty space again. Mononaga sat on the throne, scanning his surroundings with eyes filled with satisfaction and a little embarrassment. He had noticed that Sebas and the maids were still standing by in a dormant state. It seems a little lonely and a little odd to have them standing motionless like that. I think there was a command for that. Mononaga recalled the words he had heard before and extended a hand before lightly bringing it down. Kneel. As one, Albedo, Sebas, and the 6 males fell to one knee in obeisance. Good. Mononaga raised his left hand to check the time. 23, 55, 48. He was just in time. In all likelihood, the GMs were probably flooding the public channels and setting off fireworks. Mononaga, who had put his heart and soul into this place and cut off all contact with the outside world, was unaware of it. Mononaga leaned against the backs of the throne and slowly raised his head to look at the sea. He believed that even on the last day of the game, some invaders might come to Nazareth. He would wait for them. He would accept any challenge in his position as guildmaster. He had sent emails to all guild members, but only a few had come. He would wait for them. He would welcome his comrades back in his position as guildmaster. A relic of the past, huh? Mononaga sank into thought. Although the guild now was just an empty shell, he had enjoyed his time. He turned his eyes to look at the huge flags hanging from the ceiling. There were 41 of them in total, the same number as there were guild members. Each of them displayed the personal symbol of each guild member. Mononaga extended a bony finger and pointed to one of them. Mine. Then he turned his attention to a nearby flag. That flag represented one of the strongest players in Iron's Vulcan. No, in all of Yggdrasil. He was the one who started the guild, and the one who had gathered the original 9. Touch me. The symbol on the next floor pointed to belongs to the oldest member of Iron's Olga, who was a lecturer in a university in real life. Shizun Suzaku. His fingers moved faster than before as he shifted to the flag, which belonged to one of the 3 female members of Iron's Olga, Ankoro Mochimuchi. Mononaga fluidly recited the names of the various symbol owners: Hero Hero, Pero Chinchu, Buko Buko Chakamaka, Chabula Shmagarina, Warrior, Takame Tachushi, Variable Talisman, Genjiro. It did not take long for him to name all 40 of his former comrades. Their names were still branded deeply in Mononaga's brain. He sprawled tiredly on the floor. Yeah, it was really fun. Even though the game did not have any subscription fees, Mononaga still had spent a third of his monthly salary on it. It was not because his salary was high, but because he had no other hobbies, so he funneled all his income into Icarus. There was a cash gacha in the game where players could pay for a chance to win a prize. Mononaga spent nearly his entire bonus on it, and barely managed to get a rare item out of the experience. When he heard that one of his guild members, Yamaiko, had won that item for the cost of a lunch, Mononaga had been so envious that he wanted to roll around on the ground. She yelled out, "Gachas are slang for game-based lotteries or lucky draws. They are named after gachapoons, which are coin-operated vending machines which randomly dispense a prize." Because almost all of Ain's All-Gons members were productive members of society, most of them were willing to spend money on this hobby, and among them, Mononaga was one of the bigger spenders. He was probably one of the top few on the server. That was how dedicated he was. Adventuring was fun, but the greatest joy was found in playing with his friends. To Mononaga, whose parents had passed away and who had no friends in real life, the guild, Iron's All Gone, was a shining memory of the good times he had with his friends. And now, this guild would disappear. His heart was filled with regret and reluctance. Mononaga gripped the staff for Iron's All Gone tightly. He was just an ordinary sailor. He lacked the financial power or connection to change that fact. He was just another player who could only watch the closing time as it approached. The time on his watch read 23:57. The server would shut down at 00:00. There were a little time left. The virtual world would end, and he would have to go back to reality the next day. That was only natural. Nobody could live in a virtual world, which is why everyone had left, one by one. Mononaga sighed. He had to wake up at 4 tomorrow. He had to sleep the moment the server shut down in order to not affect the next day's work. 23, 59, 35, 36, 37. Mononaga set his watch to count out the seconds. 48, 49, 50. Mononaga closed his eyes. 58, 59. The countdown finished. He waited for the curtains to fall on his fantasy world. He waited for the automatic logout. 00:00. 1, 2, 3. Mononaga opened his eyes. He had not returned to his familiar room. This was still the throne room in Icarus. What's going on? The time was right. He should have been forcibly locked out by the server shutdown. 0:00:38. It was definitely past midnight. The clock could not have gone wrong because of system error. Confused, Mononaga looked around, searching for any clues in the vicinity. Could it be that they delayed the server shutdown? Or had they extended playtime as a form of compensation? Although numerous reasons appeared in his mind, they were all far from the truth, however. The most likely reason was an irresistible force had cropped up and extended the server shutdown time. If that was the case, the GMs would have made an announcement. Mononaga hurriedly worked to reopen the message panel he had closed, and then he stopped halfway. There was no command console. What on earth happened? Mononaga was filled with panic, frustration, and suspicion, but he was also surprised by how calm he was considering the circumstances. He decided to call out other names, forcing connection that did not require console, the chat function, a GM call, a forced logout. None of them responded. It was as though they had been deleted from the system. What the hell is going on? Ononaga's angry voice echoes throughout the throne room, then vanished. Today was the last day of Eagers. And all these things were happening on a day that should have marked an end to the game. Was this some kind of prank they were pulling on the players? Mononaga was quite unhappy that he could not meet the end of the game in the style. The words he muttered clearly illustrate the anger inside him. There should not have been any reply to his hostile suspicion. However, what is wrong, Mononaga-sama? It was the first time he had heard that beautiful woman voice. Mononaga was startled, but he still kept searching for the source of the voice. When he found the one who had spoken the words just now, he was speechless. The person who had answered was the NPC raising her head. Albedo.